I went for a morning run and saw my fiancée by the lake with a man pulling his shirt on. She said she was at home sleeping. When I called her name, I used to think morning runs were the safest part of my routine. Nothing dramatic ever happened at 6 in the morning at Lakeshore Park. People walked their dogs, a couple retirees power walked in windbreakers, and I usually zoned out somewhere between the 3rd mile and the 4th while letting the sunrise bleed across the water. It was predictable, quiet, and simple. That morning felt the same at first. Sneakers hitting pavement, steady breathing, mist rising above the lake, the cold pinching my cheeks awake. I remember thinking the water looked strangely still, like it was holding its breath. I cut off the main trail to a smaller footpath that curved closer to the lake. The ground dipped slightly, and the path narrowed as it passed through a cluster of bare trees. I usually avoided that stretch because the roots stuck out like booby traps, but that day something drew me toward it. I figured it was the fog, or maybe I was just bored enough to switch up the route. A few steps in, I slowed down. There were voices somewhere ahead, muffled and low. Nothing unusual. A couple might have stopped to admire the sunrise. Then I saw a shape move through the fog. A person bending over, then straightening up with a jerking motion, like somebody yanking fabric into place. Another step forward, and everything inside me froze. There she was, Sienna, my fiancée, standing by the lake. Her hair messy, her face flushed, and a man next to her pulling his shirt over his shoulders. They were facing the water at first, not noticing me. The angle of their bodies said enough before I even processed the rest. I felt my stomach flip, like something inside me had grabbed onto the wrong gear. For a second, I genuinely believed I had gone insane. The early sun hit my eyes, and I actually blinked several times as if a clearer view would magically change the scene. But no amount of blinking was going to alter the fact that the person I came home to every night was standing in a secluded spot at dawn with a half-dressed stranger. My footsteps must have snapped a twig or shifted gravel, because Sienna turned. Her entire body stiffened. Her hands curled into fists, then loosened, then froze again. The guy beside her took one look at me and instinctively stepped back. He didn't even pretend to say hello. He bolted toward the tree line with a kind of speed I didn't know regular office workers possessed. I heard the crunch of leaves as he disappeared deeper into the woods like some terrified raccoon. I said her name. Sienna flinched so hard her shoulder jerked up. Her eyes darted everywhere except my face. She looked at the ground, the water, her shoes, the fog, the spot where the stranger had vanished. She breathed fast, like she had been sprinting or arguing or doing something far more intimate than any of that. She finally walked toward me, but every step had this reluctant, uneven rhythm. When she reached a few feet away, she stopped, as if crossing that last bit of distance would force her to commit to whatever story she was trying to assemble inside her head. Her hair was tied in a loose bun she only did when she had just woken up. Except she wasn't supposed to be awake. She had told me last night that she was exhausted and planned to sleep in. She even asked if I could keep the kitchen noise down when I left for the run. She had been in bed when I stepped out. Or at least, that's what I thought. A jogger coming from the opposite direction slowed as he passed us. He gave Sienna an awkward wave, then looked at me, probably trying to understand why the air felt like it was vibrating with tension. After he continued past, the silence sat between us like a barricade. The first words that came out of Sienna's mouth were so disconnected from the situation that they almost felt surreal. She asked what I was doing there, as if I hadn't run this same path for the last 4 years. When I told her I normally took the other trail, she said she had trouble sleeping and needed fresh air. A flimsy excuse, delivered with shaky breath and eyes that kept flicking toward the woods where her companion had disappeared. I asked who the man was. She said she didn't know. Then she said he was someone from the neighborhood. Then she said his dog ran away and she was helping him look for it. It would have been comical if the situation weren't burning through the center of my chest. There was no dog, no leash, no sense in the way her story mutated every 2 seconds. Each excuse rushed out faster than the one before, like she was trying to outrun the truth the same way that guy had sprinted into the trees. Another runner passed by and paused for a moment near us. He glanced at Sienna and casually said he had seen her standing by the lake earlier when he was finishing his first lap. He estimated she had been there at least an hour. His tone was friendly, casual, completely unaware that his comment had just sliced through whatever fragile story Sienna had been constructing. When he continued his jog, Sienna's face fell into something close to panic. Her hands shook when she brushed hair behind her ear. I watched her fumble for the next line in this collapsing script. She said she needed to go home and talk, somewhere private. Her voice had a begging edge to it, though she tried to bury it under a tone that suggested she was still in control. Her shoes were soaked from the wet grass. Her leggings had dirt smeared on the back, like she had been sitting or kneeling. Every detail added weight to the moment. I should have walked away right then, but humans are strange creatures when something shatters in front of them. We leaned toward the wreckage instead of stepping back, so I followed her along the narrow trail. She walked fast, almost too fast, tripping once on a root. She didn't even look back to see if I was behind her. She knew I was. Her shoulders were tense, rising and falling with shallow breaths. We reached the main road that cut through the park. A cyclist zoomed by, and she startled slightly, as if expecting the stranger from the woods to reappear. She kept pressing her lips together like she was trying to stop the truth from leaking out. We crossed the parking lot. A few early walkers loaded their dogs into cars. A man sipped coffee by his trunk. Everything looked normal except for the bizarre, shaking energy surrounding us. When we got to the car, she paused with her hand on the passenger door. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked at me for the first time since I had said her name by the lake. Her eyes were glossy, not from tears but from adrenaline. It was the look of someone caught halfway through a decision that had no good outcome. A breeze moved across the lot and lifted strands of her hair. She inhaled sharply, almost as if that breath was meant to give her courage. Then she unlocked the doors. We got inside, and the silence felt even heavier inside the enclosed space. She gripped the steering wheel before starting the car, holding it too tightly. Her fingers were pale from the pressure. The drive back home was stiff and tense. She kept her eyes locked on the road, blinking fast. I noticed her thumb tapping against her thigh, a nervous tick she only did when she had something to hide. The trees blurred past on both sides of the road, and the morning light got brighter as the sun lifted higher. The peaceful quiet of early morning was gone. Every second felt stretched, like the air itself was waiting for something to explode. When we pulled into the parking lot of our building, she didn't get out immediately. She sat there breathing unevenly. I watched her chest rise and fall with that anxious rhythm. She finally opened the door and stepped out. Her legs looked unsteady. She hurried toward the stairwell, avoiding the elevator, avoiding any enclosed space where she would be forced to talk. On the stairs, she paused halfway up, gripping the railing. Her head hung slightly, and her voice came out low and strained as she said she needed to explain from the beginning, but she asked me to stay calm. She said it like she expected me to explode. I hadn't said a single angry word yet. The only voice cracking in that stairwell was hers. We reached our apartment. She unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The moment the door closed behind us, the atmosphere shifted. Our living room, always warm and familiar, suddenly felt foreign. The couch, the photos on the wall, the little ceramic bowl where we tossed keys, everything felt like it belonged to a different life. She stood in the middle of the room, holding her arms as if she were cold. I could see the moment she realized every excuse she had made outside was crumbling. Her eyes drifted to the window, then to the floor, then to the hallway leading to our bedroom. She didn't know where to look because every direction reminded her of something she was about to ruin. I said nothing. I wanted her to start. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She tried again. Still nothing. Her throat worked like she was trying to push something down. The silence stretched until the room felt too small. And then, in the span of a single second, something happened that shifted the entire power of the situation. Her phone buzzed. The screen lit up, and the name on the notification was disguised, but not enough to hide the truth. That was the moment the real unraveling began. The moment her phone lit up, everything in the room shifted. It was like the sound of that vibration cracked open whatever thin wall she'd tried building on the walk home. Sienna grabbed for the phone too quickly, almost knocking it off the table in her rush. Her hand hovered above the screen, shaking. That alone told me everything I needed to know, but I still stepped closer. The name on the notification looked harmless, almost boring, something like a food delivery service. But the preview text was not a delivery confirmation. It was a short message asking if she made it home safely and telling her he was heading to work after their morning together. The kind of message that carried the tone of routine rather than accident. A familiar tone. A comfortable tone. A tone that suggested this wasn't some bizarre one-off moment at the lake, but something practiced. Sienna pulled the phone close to her chest as if I was about to snatch it. Her breathing turned rapid again, the rise and fall almost frantic. I asked her to explain, and instead of answering, she started pacing. Her steps moved in small, jittery circles, her fingers pressing against her temples. She kept saying she could clarify if I just gave her time. There was no coherent attempt, only noise. I stayed by the table, letting her speak herself into exhaustion. She tried building a story out of mismatched explanations. Something about a coworker who needed support, something about early morning panic attacks, and somehow she even tossed in a cousin I'd never heard of. None of it fit together. The more she spoke, the less sense anything made. Each sentence contradicted the last. She couldn't even keep her tone steady. It wavered between defensive, pleading, and strangely angry. as if she believed frustration could overpower the reality of what I saw. For a moment, she stopped pacing and leaned on the counter with both hands, staring at the floor. She said she didn't want me to think the worst. The irony sat heavy in the air. I asked again who the man was. This time she said a name I'd never heard before. She insisted it wasn't what I thought, but that claim had no shape, no structure, and no proof behind it. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The truth was waiting for her in the glowing rectangle still gripped in her shaking hand. She saw me looking at the phone again and stepped back as if physical distance could rewrite the message. She said I was making assumptions. She said I was jumping to conclusions. She said anything to avoid the one thing she needed to say. Every line made the room heavier. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number at first. I opened the message without thinking. It was from Tobias, who worked security overnight at a lakeside restaurant. He'd sent a short text asking if everything was all right, because he thought he had seen Sienna multiple evenings near the docks with a man who matched the description of the guy from the lake. He didn't know details. He only said he hoped it wasn't something serious. That message landed like a hammer. Not because Tobias had sent it, but because he didn't know anything about my morning yet. His message was completely unrelated, arriving before I could even describe what happened at the lake. That meant whatever was going on had been happening long before today. The awful part was how easily the timeline began forming in my mind. Late nights, she claimed to be stressed from work. Early mornings, she said she wanted to journal outside. Moments when she guarded her phone a little too tightly. It all began lining up in ways I wished it didn't. Sienna saw the look on my face when I read Tobias's text. Panic sharpened her expression again. She demanded to know who had messaged me. When I told her, she said Tobias must be confused. She said he probably saw someone who looked like her. She said anything except the truth. I told her I wanted her to look me in the eye and talk clearly. She couldn't. Her gaze hit the couch, the carpet, the shelf, the wall, the floor, anywhere but me. The silence stretched so long that even the refrigerator hum felt intrusive. I could see the exact moment she ran out of excuses. Her shoulders slumped slightly. She sat down on the edge of the couch with her hands on her forehead. She didn't look broken. She looked cornered. Then she said something quietly, almost to herself, something about things being more complicated than I understood. She said it wasn't physical, that it was emotional, that she needed someone to talk to and it got out of hand. She said she felt lonely even when she was home with me and didn't want to hurt me by admitting it. The words tumbled together like she was reading from a page she didn't practice enough. None of it aligned with what I saw by the lake or with the message on her phone. The tone didn't match the gravity of what she was trying to describe. It felt rehearsed, like something borrowed from a conversation she had imagined having under less disastrous circumstances. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed again. She flinched like it burned her. This time, she didn't go for it. She stared at the screen while it lit up. The same disguised contact. Another message. She still didn't touch it, but the way her throat tightened gave away her guilt. In that moment, she shifted again. Her tone sharpened. She said I was overreacting. She said the situation wasn't as dramatic as I was making it. She said she felt suffocated by my sudden interrogation. It was a bizarre pivot that only made the tension worse. She tried turning the conversation into an accusation about trust, privacy, space, and stress. The words stacked fast, a wall she hoped would protect her. But every attempt collapsed under its own weight. I stood in the same place the whole time. Calm, steady, letting her unravel at her own pace. Silence was doing more damage than anything I could have said. Eventually, she stopped long enough to breathe. She looked at me like she expected me to change my mind, or like she hoped I would soften. But she had nothing left to say that could fix the growing distance. Then the second major twist of the morning hit. My phone buzzed again. A different message. This one from an unknown number. When I opened it, the message said it was important and that I needed to know something about Sienna and the man from the lake. It ended with a request to call back as soon as possible. There was no name, but the tone was tense, personal, and urgent. The kind of message you don't get by accident. Sienna watched my face carefully, her breathing picking up again. She asked who it was. I didn't answer immediately. The room felt too small for the moment. The phone vibrated once more. A second message came through from the same number. This one was longer. It said the sender was connected to the man from the lake. It said they had been suspicious for weeks. It said everything matched the pattern they feared. It said they didn't want to hide anything anymore. Sienna's face drained. Not in the quiet, guilty way earlier, but in a way that carried genuine fear. She whispered something under her breath, barely audible. It sounded like she recognized the number. And that recognition told me more than her explanations ever could. I stepped away from her and walked toward the window just to clear my head. Outside, the morning light looked deceptively normal. People walked their dogs. Cars pulled in and out of parking spots. The world moved on like nothing strange was happening behind this window. But inside this apartment, the air felt heavy, thick with the truth she kept trying to fight. I turned around and saw her squeezing her hands together so tightly they turned pale. She kept swallowing hard, her eyes flicking between me and her phone. She opened her mouth again, but this time there was no excuse ready. She knew the situation had slipped beyond her control. Whatever she had been hiding wasn't something she could patch together anymore. Sienna's face drained, not in the quiet, guilty way earlier, but in a way that carried genuine fear. She whispered something under her breath, barely audible. It sounded like she recognized the number, and that recognition told me more than her explanations ever could. I stepped away from her and walked toward the window just to clear my head. Outside, the morning light looked deceptively normal. People walked their dogs. Cars pulled in and out of parking spots. The world moved on like nothing strange was happening behind this window. But inside this apartment, the air felt heavy, thick with the truth she kept trying to fight. I turned around and saw her squeezing her hands together so tightly they turned pale. She kept swallowing hard, her eyes flicking between me and her phone. She opened her mouth again, but this time there was no excuse ready. She knew the situation had slipped beyond her control. Whatever she had been hiding wasn't something she could patch together anymore. I didn't say anything. She was waiting for me to explode or argue or throw accusations, but I didn't give her a reaction she could twist into a distraction. I wanted her to speak first. The silence stretched even further until she broke it unintentionally by exhaling a shaky breath that sounded more like a surrender. I asked her one question, the one that mattered more than any detail or message or timeline. Was this the first time? She didn't answer. Not with words. Not with denial. Not with anything at all. Her silence was the first honest thing she'd given me all morning. And just like that, the final layer of whatever lie she'd been trying to build collapsed. Silence can expose a person faster than any argument. When Sienna didn't answer my question, something shifted fundamentally between us. The room felt colder, as if the air had pulled away from her and settled somewhere else. Her shoulders curled in like she was trying to hide inside herself, but she didn't look ashamed. She looked terrified of what would happen next, terrified because she knew there was nowhere left to run inside that tiny living room. She sat on the couch again, elbows on her knees, hands pressed against her face. I stayed standing by the window because sitting felt too final, like accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. The morning sun was climbing higher outside, but it didn't warm anything in the apartment. It only made everything clearer. Dust floating in the air. A crooked picture frame. The half-folded blanket from last night's movie. Things that belonged to a home built on the assumption that two people were living honestly. Now every object looked misplaced. Sienna finally lowered her hands. She rubbed her eyes, then stared at the phone she was still gripping as if she couldn't decide whether to throw it or hide it. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, then gave up. Her voice cracked slightly when she said she needed a glass of water. She walked to the kitchen with uneven steps, opened the cabinet, grabbed a glass, filled it, but didn't drink it. She just held it, staring at the counter. Every movement had that disoriented heaviness, like her body was moving without instructions. Then my phone buzzed again. The unknown number tried to call this time. Sienna whipped her head around so fast the water in her glass sloshed over the rim. She put the glass on the counter and walked toward me, her expression stretched tight with dread. She asked me not to answer. Her voice had that pleading tone again, the one that sounded less like concern for me and more like fear for herself. I answered anyway. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman, calm but strained, like she'd been preparing herself to make this call for days. She asked if I was Sienna's fiancé. I said yes. She exhaled sharply, not with relief, but with confirmation. She introduced herself as the wife of the man from the lake. She didn't even wait for me to respond before explaining that she had been suspicious for weeks. Late-night behavior changes. Unexplained early mornings. Phone secrecy. Shifted routines. Everything she described matched the pattern I had been noticing in Sienna. Sienna stepped closer, shaking her head desperately, mouthing something like stop. Her eyes were wide with panic. She reached for my arm, but I stepped aside. Her hand dropped to her side like the strength had drained from it. The woman on the phone said she had confronted her husband last night, and he denied everything. But he left the apartment early this morning without explanation. She said she tracked his location because she was certain something was wrong. It had led her to the lake area. She didn't follow him there, but she saw the location and recognized the pattern. She said she didn't want to blow up my life without certainty, but after he returned home acting nervous and evasive, she knew something had happened. She said she had finally found my number through a coworker who remembered meeting me at a company holiday event. The connection was thin, but enough. I listened without interrupting. Her voice stayed steady the whole call, but I could hear the exhaustion in it. The weight of someone holding everything together because falling apart wasn't an option yet. Sienna whispered again not to listen. Her voice barely held shape. She kept stepping forward, then stopping, like she wanted to intervene, but couldn't figure out how without exposing herself more. The woman told me something that tightened every muscle in my body. She said this morning wasn't the first time. She said she didn't know details, but suspected it had been going on for at least a few months. She said her husband suddenly cared about early workouts, lake views, and quiet morning time, despite never showing interest in any of those things before. She said he sometimes came home smelling like the outdoors, even when the weather didn't match. She said she had seen Sienna and him together once outside his workplace, but wasn't sure what she'd witnessed at the time. Every detail lined up with Sienna's recent behavior. I thanked the woman for telling me. She apologized again, not out of pity, but out of shared devastation. Two strangers caught in the same explosion from different angles. When I hung up, the silence felt thick enough to chew. Sienna had one hand over her mouth, her breathing rapid again. She kept shaking her head like she believed denial could bend reality back into shape. I walked past her and sat on the edge of the armchair. The small distance changed the power balance in the room. She stood stiff in the middle of the living room like someone waiting to hear a verdict. I didn't ask for more lies. I didn't need explanations. I just asked her to sit down. She sank onto the couch slowly. Her hands clutched each other tightly in her lap. She looked like she was trying to organize her thoughts into something that wouldn't incriminate her, but there was no way to do that anymore. I asked her how long it had been happening. She whispered something about emotional connection again. She said it wasn't supposed to happen, that it started when she felt overwhelmed with work, that she met him during a rough week. She said she didn't mean for any of this to go this far. She said she tried ending it, but couldn't. None of it was direct. None of it had solid structure. She kept describing feelings instead of events. I asked again how long. This time the silence answered. Silence always reveals more than words. She finally said she didn't know. That was enough for me to understand the timeline stretched far beyond what she had tried to imply earlier. I stood and walked toward the bedroom. Not to leave, just to create breathing space. She followed a few steps behind, but then stopped in the hallway and leaned against the wall. Her breathing echoed faintly in the narrow space. In the bedroom, the bed looked untouched from the night before. I thought about how she had told me she wanted to sleep in, how she insisted she needed rest, how she had pulled the blanket up to her shoulders and pretended to fall asleep immediately. The version of her I believed was lying right there, warm and familiar. And the version standing in the hallway now felt like a stranger who had borrowed someone else's life. Sienna stepped into the room slowly. She said she didn't want to lose everything. She said she wanted to fix it. She said she would explain everything if I listened longer. Each sentence trembled like it was on unstable legs. I wasn't angry. Anger would have given her something to fight against, something she could latch onto and twist. Staying calm made the truth sit heavier between us. I told her I didn't want excuses. I wanted the real version of events, not the softened version she wanted to believe happened. Her eyes darted away again. She said she had been confused. She said she didn't plan any of it. She said she hadn't known how to tell me. She said the morning at the lake had been the last time, that she had planned to end it today. The timing was too convenient to be real. Then came another reminder of the world outside this apartment. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't touch it. She didn't even look. She just closed her eyes like the sound itself was torture. Maybe it was. Maybe hearing the consequences pile up faster than she could manage felt like drowning. Her voice sounded barely intact when she said she needed me to believe her version of events. She said she had made a mistake. But mistakes don't repeat themselves for months. Mistakes don't have disguises for contact names. Mistakes don't run into the woods half-dressed at dawn. I walked back into the living room, giving myself space again. She stayed in the bedroom doorway, staring at the floor. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message. This time, it was a photo. Not a dramatic one. Not anything scandalous. Just a picture of the co-worker and Sienna leaving a lakeside restaurant weeks ago. Walking too close. Her hand brushing his arm. Their heads leaned together. The little details that reveal a pattern. Someone else had seen it. And now it was in my phone, confirming what she still couldn't say out loud. I turned the screen toward her. Her knees buckled slightly. That was when the last piece of denial drained out of her face. Everything she had been protecting cracked completely. When Sienna saw the photo, something inside her seemed to collapse. Not dramatically, not the way people break down in movies, but in a quiet, internal way that looked more like resignation than shock. She steadied herself on the doorframe, and for a moment it looked like she might slide down to the floor, but she didn't. She stayed upright, barely. Her shoulders slumped, and she pressed the back of her hand against her forehead as if trying to steady her thoughts. I waited. Waiting made the air heavier. She looked at the photo again, then looked at me, and whatever story she had been clinging to dissolved completely. She didn't try to deny it anymore. She didn't say anything about misunderstandings or confusion. All she said was that she didn't know how to explain where everything went wrong. Her voice had that uneven tone that comes when someone is talking more to themselves than to the person standing in front of them. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't need more details. Every answer she would have offered would have been built on something already cracked. Instead, I told her to sit down so we could talk without her collapsing. She sat on the edge of the couch the same way she had earlier, stiff, tense, hands gripped together, knuckles pale. I sat on the armchair across from her. That distance mattered. It gave me space to think, space to breathe, space to stay calm. She waited for me to speak, but I stayed silent at first. She kept twisting her fingers together as if she could wring the truth out of them. I told her I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to yell or beg or demand anything from her. I just needed clarity. I told her we had reached a point where the truth was no longer something she could choose to share or hide. It was already in the room. It had been in the room since dawn at the lake. She lowered her head. Her voice barely held shape when she said she had felt distant for months and didn't know how to say it. She said she thought she could handle it alone. She said she didn't want to ruin our life together, so she kept pretending everything was fine. She said she didn't expect any of it to escalate the way it had. She kept describing feelings instead of events, like that would soften what happened. I didn't interrupt, but her explanation stretched thin quickly. Eventually, she said the part she kept avoiding. She said she had let her coworker get too close. She said they confided in each other. She said they spent more time together outside work. She said they both crossed lines slowly, and by the time she realized what she was doing, she felt trapped between leaving and pretending. She said she couldn't bring herself to end it even when she knew it was going too far. That was the closest she came to admitting the truth without using words she couldn't bring herself to say. When she finished, the room went quiet again. She stared at her hands like she was seeing them for the first time. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to let her know I was listening. I asked her why she kept lying even after the moment at the lake. She didn't have an answer for that. She said everything happened too fast. She said she panicked. She said she thought she could still control the situation. Panic and control, an impossible combination, but she said both like they made sense together. I told her something I realized only minutes before. I said the lies hurt more than the truth she was hiding. She looked at me then, really looked, like the words had hit harder than anything else. Her face flushed, and her eyes filled with a tired kind of recognition. She knew I was right. The morning at the lake was devastating, but the hours that followed were worse. Every moment she layered excuses over something already visible made the distance between us wider. She asked if we could fix things. She asked it cautiously, like she already knew the answer. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to choose a tone that wouldn't give her false hope, but also wouldn't set fire to the situation unnecessarily. I said healing needed honesty, and we hadn't had that in months. I said trust required transparency, and we had none of that left. I said a relationship couldn't survive if one person built a life inside another version of themselves. She started crying quietly, but not dramatically. Just a steady stream she kept trying to wipe away before it fell too far. She asked again if there was a chance to rebuild. I told her not the way things stood. She looked down, and her shoulders lifted slightly in a small, broken motion. She nodded, not because she agreed, but because she didn't know what else to do with the truth she had tried so hard to hide. I stood and said I needed air. I walked down the hallway, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out onto the apartment balcony. The cold morning air hit me immediately, sharp and grounding. People were heading to work below. Dogs barked in the distance. A delivery truck parked across the street. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed, even though everything inside that apartment had shifted. While I stood outside, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the number belonging to the coworker's wife. It wasn't another photo or accusation. It was a short message saying she had thrown him out and was staying at her sister's place. She said she hoped I wasn't alone and that I had people to lean on. I told her I appreciated it and that I hoped she had support too. The conversation ended quietly, both of us exhausted in different apartments, connected only by the fallout from two people who couldn't stay faithful. I stayed on the balcony until the cold sank into my hands. When I finally walked back inside, Sienna was still sitting on the couch. Her face was red, her eyes tired, and she looked like she had aged years in one morning. She didn't stand when I entered. She didn't try to speak. She just waited. I told her I was ending the engagement. Quiet, direct, calm. There was no argument left to have. She nodded without lifting her head. She didn't fight it. She didn't plead this time. She just absorbed it like a blow she had expected from the moment I found her by the lake. I asked her to stay somewhere else for a few days so we could both think clearly. She said she would pack a bag. She stood slowly, walked to the bedroom, and began collecting her things. No dramatic packing. No frantic rushing. Just slow movements like someone packing for a place they didn't want to go. When she left, she paused at the door for a moment, as if waiting for some last-minute change of heart. I didn't offer one. She stepped into the hallway and walked away, her footsteps echoing faintly as the door clicked shut. The apartment felt larger and smaller at the same time. Still, quiet, heavy. Later that day, the consequences rippled outward. Her co-worker's wife filed for separation. Human Resources at their workplace called both of them in for interviews after hearing about inappropriate conduct from a concerned colleague. Their reputations shifted within a single afternoon. Decisions they hid in shadows finally reached daylight. And daylight never softened anything. As for me, I took a long walk by the same lake where the morning started. The water looked calm again, almost peaceful. No fog, no strangers, no cracks forming beneath the surface. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after something breaks completely and leaves space behind it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt quiet. A kind of quiet that comes from recognizing a future that no longer includes a person you thought would be there. It wasn't relief, but it wasn't despair either. It was acceptance. A beginning disguised inside an ending. The next weeks weren't dramatic. Life rearranged itself slowly. Friends checked in. Work stayed steady. Jogging became easier again. The apartment lost its tension. And the silence that once suffocated the room stopped feeling like a problem and started feeling like space to rebuild. Sienna tried contacting me once more through a mutual friend, but I didn't respond. Some things didn't need revisiting. What happened at the lake settled the answer permanently. What remained was clarity. And clarity, as it turns out, is far quieter than chaos.